In the last video, we discussed the concept of impact tolerances. In this video, we will demonstrate how Signavio can help you to assess your ability to remain in tolerance, both on a peak day with unexpectedly high volume, or if you are forced to use an alternative workaround or backup process. UK regulators have provided firms with a transition period to come into compliance and be able to deliver their important business services within impact tolerances. So this, in conjunction with scenario testing, will help firms to identify where they may need to invest in order to bring themselves within tolerance going forward. In previous videos, we identified payments as an important business service. Starting with the familiar Signavio Operational Resilience portal, we showed the payments value chain and the high-level activities involved in the payment service: payment initiation, payment authorization, payment capture, and payment settlement. Signavio lets you simulate multiple scenarios which you can use to assess the impact of that scenario on your ability to remain within tolerance. Taking a simple example, let's assume that we have an organisation where payments are initiated through only two channels, CHAPS and faster payments. As you can see, these two payment initiation options are shown here on this flow. We will now go into the Signavio Explorer view, which can now demonstrate how firms can calibrate their impact tolerances. In the base scenario, which for this example is CHAPS, you can add in information on the execution costs relating to each step of the flow. If you want to skip this step and just put 0, you can. However, it may be helpful from a perspective of weighing up the cost implications of using a contingency option or workaround, and so may help with weighing up decisions on whether to invest in making certain processes within a service more resilient. You can then add in information on how long each step in the chain takes. In this example, we include information on how long a CHAPS payment takes versus an FPS payment. You can then edit information to show in the baseline scenario how frequently does this service run. In this instance, we have gone for how many payments are processed per day. But the frequency can be how often it happens in a week or a different duration if that is more appropriate. There is then a decision point where you can toggle the volume of payments going through CHAPS versus FPS in the baseline scenario. For this example, in BAU, let's assume that 100% of payments go through CHAPS and 0% go through FPS. If you run the scenario, you can see how long the overall service takes from a duration perspective and the overall costs. Focusing on duration, we can see here how long it takes to process the payments. You can export this information into Excel, which shows the breakdown of costs and time in the different scenarios for each of the steps within the chain. You can play around with the frequency in order to model a peak day and make sure you can still remain within tolerance if, for example, payment volume tripled. So here you can see the time it would then take to process those payments would be 1 day and 16 hours. In which case, if you had an impact tolerance of 24 hours to process payments, you are now potentially outside of the tolerance in this scenario. We can then run an alternative scenario where we can increase the flow of transactions going through faster payments from 0% to 50%. From running the scenario, we can see the impact on costs, duration versus the baseline scenario where we had 50% of payments going through CHAPS. Firms may want to take this a step further and model the impact of automating a particular process step. For example, using the contingency plan, let's say FPS payment process reduces from taking 40 minutes to now taking 1 minute. The cost also increases to £15. Again, firms can model the cost and duration impact of this on the overall process and compare it against baseline scenarios. The time taken now reduces to 12 hours. This is a very simple example, but you can make this much more complicated. Equally, you can also run simulations at a service level rather than at a process level. For instance, you might want to assign costs and times to an overall business service in order to model the whole business service value chain to get an impact tolerance per business service. Overall, it is important for firms to understand their ability to remain within impact tolerance within BAU and also in stress. This Signavio demo has shown examples of how firms can calibrate their impact tolerances and test their ability to remain within a particular tolerance on peak days or when using contingency plans or automating particular processes or systems, which can help drive investment discussions and other decisions. The Operational Resilience video series so far has focused on steps which organisations should be following in order to address the evolving requirements around operational resilience. We have looked at the key regulatory requirements for defining important business services and setting impact tolerance for each important business service. We have demonstrated that Signavio is a tool which can be used to map resources such as processes, people, systems, facilities, and third parties onto a business service and can simulate multiple scenarios which firms can use to assess the impact of a particular scenario on their ability to remain within tolerance. If you have any questions or would like to discuss the challenges your firm is experiencing around operational resilience, please reach out to Signavio or Baringa Partners at opresilience@baringa.com.